For Pacifica Radio, I'm Christina Onnested. The United Nations Weather Agency warns world powers are falling far behind achieving goals to curb climate change. It comes as a report says 3 key greenhouse gases hit record high levels in the atmosphere last year. Eileen Alfandary has more.
The director of the World Meteorological Organization says carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide hit record high levels in the atmosphere last year. Petri Tala says the planet is headed in the wrong direction and will feel the consequences.
A trend in climate will continue for the coming decades. Flooding, drought, heat waves, tropical storms.
Tala said carbon dioxide is responsible for 2/3 of global warming, primarily through burning fossil fuels, and it can take up to thousands of years to remove carbon from the atmosphere. He says if the world cuts back dramatically on the use of fossil fuels, the planet will see improved weather patterns by 2060, but it's too late for the glaciers.
The game that we have already lost is the melting of glaciers. We have so high concentration of carbon dioxide that the melting of glaciers will continue for the coming hundreds of years, even coming thousands of years.
The UN's children's agency, UNICEF, is urging the upcoming November climate summit known as COP27 to prioritize children in discussions on adapting to a heating planet. I'm Eileen Alfandary.
Russia's foreign ministry spokesperson says the threat of a nuclear conflict has risen amid the fighting in Ukraine. Maria Zakharova argued today that, quote, the more the U.S. is drawn into supporting Kiev on the battlefield, the more they risk provoking a direct military confrontation between the biggest nuclear powers fraught with catastrophic consequences, unquote. This follows NATO and Russia's separately planned annual nuclear exercises yesterday, just as Russia's President Vladimir Putin repeated the unfounded claim Ukraine plans to send off radioactive dirty bomb. His comments are translated by Al Jazeera.
They ignore the statements of the Kyiv regime about the desire to get nuclear weapons. After all, the Kyiv authorities said that openly. No, everyone is keeping quiet. There are also plans to use the so-called dirty bomb for provocations.
Russia says Ukraine plans to supplant a dirty bomb inside a Russian missile to make it look like a Russian attack. On the battlefront, Russian forces pounded more than 40 Ukrainian villages. Moscow's appointed authorities, though, had fled the capital of southern Ukraine's Kherson region as Ukraine forces attacked Russia's hold on the city in its counteroffensive to reclaim lands recently annexed. Protests continue across Iran as Iranians wage a near-general strike in protest of the in-custody death of a 22-year-old Mahsa Amini while in custody of Iran's morality police for not wearing her headscarf properly. Thousands flooded to her gravesite yesterday at her hometown as protests continued across the country, with doctors and oil workers joining actions that took place in more than 30 cities, according to the BBC. Video on social media shows protesters and the sound of gunfire. Iranian security forces are alleged to have opened fire on protesters. Iran's supreme leader, meanwhile, and its president are trying to link the protests to an attack on a famous mosque that's killed 15 people yesterday. Islamic State, though, has claimed responsibility. The U.S. economy grew at a better than expected 2.6% annual rate from July through September. The government report shows the nation's gross domestic product grew in the third quarter after having shrunk in the first half of this year. Overall, though, the outlook for the economy has darkened. The Federal Reserve has raised interest rates 5 times this year and is set to do so again next week and in December. With elections just 2 weeks away, President Joe Biden is taking action to rein in so-called junk fees, hidden fees he says unfairly take billions of dollars from consumers. It's part of a campaign to ease the strain on people amidst the inflation and war, and part of a campaign to mobilize Democrats and swing voters ahead of November's election. Christopher Martinez reports.
President Joe Biden announced new action to so-called junk fees. Hidden fees often targeting low-income people and communities of color that Biden says are taking real money out of the pockets of American families.
Things like has been mentioned, surprise banking overdraft fees, excessive credit card late fees, hidden hotel booking fees, or those huge termination charges to stop you from switching cable and internet plans to a better deal. In fact, there's an entire industry that's popping up in America to help companies use complicated algorithms to hide fees that hurt consumers and help them.
Biden says he's just getting started. His administration's Federal Trade Commission, for example, is also looking at certain kinds of fees.
Like processing fees for concert tickets.
Biden framed his announcement in terms that harken back to the Democratic Party's traditional claims to be the party of working people.
The middle class. They're the ones who built this country.
Reporting for Pacifica Radio News KPFA, I'm Christopher Martinez.
I'm Christina Onnested, reporting for Pacifica Radio.